Hey guys, Darren Carr here, coach of Wise Ocean Pods, and welcome back to another episode of the Club Preview Series. On today's episode, we are talking about the mighty Sydney Swans. Let's get into it.
All the pain.
So the Swans had a phenomenal 2024, finishing first on the AFL ladder for the home and away season. Were unstoppable throughout the season, winning majority of their games and finishing clear on the top of the ladder quite comfortably. But it all sort of came crashing down in the finals, unfortunately for them. They did well through the first couple of weeks, got to the grand final, and then things just fell apart for them quite quickly. Obviously got beaten by Brisbane Lions there in the grand final, and so that means they're the runner-up for 2024, and they're going to have to make some differences to really try and push again this year to make that next leap to win it all, whether it was a mentality thing or they just weren't in the right headspace. It's really hard to really tell. That they don't really know. All that what we know is that they're obviously very frustrated and was very disappointed in terms of the way that they finished the year. But what are we expecting them for? What are we expecting them to do in 2025? Pretty much very similar to what they had. That when you look at their list changes, they haven't really done a huge heap. Like looking at their ins, they didn't trade anyone in. They just kept the same. But in terms of outs, they did trade Luke Parker out, which is a pretty big loss and one that shocked me personally. I really didn't expect him to move off of them after being a one club player for majority of his years. For his entire season so far. Obviously moving to North Melbourne. Jacob Constantine was also another one that moved to North Melbourne. He didn't really get much of a run at Sydney, so that's not really one that they're going to miss. And obviously Sam Reid was another one that retired, but he also was quite injured in the last season, so he really didn't make too much of an influence. So really Parker was the only one that really makes a little bit of difference here, so it does free up a little bit of a spot for someone else, which we'll talk about soon. But I'm probably expecting them to stay much the same, honestly. I think they'll be around that top four sort of areas as long as they, continue to fire at all cylinders like they did in the home and away season. In terms of the draft, they went to the draft to pick 22 and 26, which is pretty surprising for a team that finished first on the AFL ladder. To have two picks in the first round is pretty phenomenal. Even though they're late in the first round, they're still very good picks in my opinion. They picked up Jesse Tatoli and Ned Bowman, which I will talk about a little bit later. At least one of them. I don't think one is as fantasy relevant, but we'll get into that. So let's get into our first player that is on my watch list for 2025, and you got to start at the top, and you got to start with the main man, and that is Errol Goulden. This man is always very hot in every preseason since he debuted back in 2021. He's been on the lips of every player, every fantasy coach, every single season. He was one of the most highly owned player to start last year, and kind of didn't work in a sense that he did drop in his average. He is down at 108 now compared to his 112 from last year, so he did drop a few points, but that potentially presents some value for us this season. So it is a bit of a tricky one. Obviously, he's still going to cost you a fair bit. He is over $1.1 million, so he would definitely be your M1. The tricky thing, obviously, they have the opening round. They play Hawthorn that week, and they have the round 3 bye, which is the trickiest early round bye, because it has 4 teams on it, as we mentioned. As I've mentioned, and as every other content creator has mentioned multiple times. The other thing that concerns me a little bit with Errol Goulden is that they now have a new coach. Obviously, Justin Longmire retired or whatever happened with him. He stepped away from the game, and now they've got a new coach, and there's been rumours that they're looking to change a few things, throw some magnets around. So could that mean that Errol Goulden potentially spends more time on the wing rather than playing this sort of 50-50 role mid-wing sort of zone? If I show you his numbers throughout the year, but he averaged 36% throughout the year, so he's got a lower end in terms of his CBA usage. Does he get more time in there? Does he get less? It's really one that we got to have to wait and see in the preseason. They really haven't shown a huge heap in terms of what they want to do so far. They really just want to probably keep the cards close to the chest, just because yeah, why review your tactics this early in the season when we're still 50 days away from round one. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in the match simulations and preseason games to really determine if he's going to get a bump in CBAs. I'd be interested to see what happens if he does get a bump in CBAs. Say he becomes a solid 60% in there. Does that give him more points? I haven't done the statistical dive into when he does have high CBAs, does he have a huge games? I don't think it would have a huge amount of difference. I really think he really benefits from his agility and his ability to run away from his opponent and really spread from from his opposition. So he really likes having that ball on the outside. So I don't know if it would be one from gut feeling. I don't think it would be beneficial to him in any way to be in and under midfielder. But it's definitely one that you got to keep an eye on. Like I said, he is a few points unders from what he is able to do, and obviously if he pushed back up to his 112, that would put him pretty close to being top midfielder in the comp. So definitely one to keep an eye on. So just keep an eye on him there. The next person I want to talk about who is fairly highly owned at the moment in the defensive line, which we all know we're struggling, is Matt Roberts. Had a breakout season in 2024. Played 23 games off halfback. Started taking a lot more kick-ins. He took 68 kick-ins for the season, which he had never seen before. Didn't play a lick of midfield at all throughout the entire season. The thing that I really like about him is that he had a couple sub-effective games. He had 3 sub-effective games, which I can show you. So his name's there. So he started the season pretty well, like as we sort of expected. It was a nice pick for us all. Then he had this really lean patch through the middle of the season. Just sort of, I don't know whether it was just because he's quite young, maybe he ran out of gas. He got dropped for a bit, came back in, played a sub, whatnot. But he played 3 games, which was sub affected. So if you remove those games, he actually averaged 82.5. So he's that's just nearly 8 points of value right off the bat just by those 3 affected games. So definitely value. And I really like the role he was playing. He played alongside Blakey, who is the other main distributor. So they really didn't have one avenue of the way that they want to distribute the ball. They were happy to really free it up between Blakey and Roberts here. So I definitely feel like he could bump up his average from even more from that 82. When I looked into it a little bit more, his time on ground was particularly low. If I show you that here, so you can see a couple. You can see those sub-affected games here. A couple green vest and 1 red vest, and a couple games where he was really low time tog, like 63%, 66%. Obviously the 15% and stuff like that. So if we were to move it and really look at when he was purely up at his 75% plus, he averaged 89. So that's 13 points of upside. So I think he could probably push 90s if he played a full season in this role again. So it definitely makes it a pretty interesting one for us at being a bit of a cheaper option. He is still expensive at 780k. The only issue is that the early round buy. Obviously, round 3, we've already got the likes of Callum Mills, who we'll get into in a second, and then you've got the likes of Bailey Smith, and then if you have a couple others in those sort of teams like a Harry Perriman and whatnot as well, you're starting to really get thin, especially in the defensive line. Cadman was another one. No, Coleman, sorry, not Cadman, Coleman. But he's probably looking less likely to play now. So we're starting to get really thin on the back line in terms of that round 3 buy. So can you probably start both Roberts and Mills and the likes of the others? Probably not. I wouldn't have thought. I'd probably say 2 is probably max. I think 3 really puts you at a disadvantage because then you're only going to have a max of 21 players on the field in those rounds, and that's really going to potentially suffer your scores because you're not having that full coverage. So really like him. The only other poor thing that I have concerns about is that he had a really poor final series. So coming into round 25, obviously this is the final series, he had a 57, a 71, and a 73. So really, really poor. Average 67. Whether that's just the finals contest where it's just more contested, didn't allow the ball to free up as much as you'd want. it was, and the other thing that I have some concerns about is that he had this really nice patch, uh, just towards the back end of the season, and that was really when McInerney, how do you want to say his name? I can never pronounce it correctly. He had this really nice patch when he was out, particularly. You can see that right there. They've set it up nicely for us. He's right below it. Well, he averaged like well over 100 in this time. So that potentially means his numbers are a little bit inflated for me. So maybe I'm 90s probably pushing it. So he's definitely one that is on my radar, and I do think he's value. I do think he can easily push, 80s, 85s, even closer to 90. But there's still a lot of concerns there that he's very young. He had a lot of games where he was very up and down. The poor final series. There's just a few concerning things there for me that are probably unlikely to start him in that sense. I think I'm more confident with the guy that we'll talk about next, Callum Mills, to probably go better than what Roberts will. So that's where my preference is now. We'll move on to Callum Mills, who is very popular. I think he's like 35% owned at the moment, and he's absolutely crazy. So he's priced at 74, so 760k ish. I only played the 7 games in 2024 after he had a shoulder injury that was extended by a calf strain. We all heard about the shoulder injury he had before the season even started, so that was a bit unfortunate. But he was due to come back halfway through the season, but then that was extended by the calf strain that he had during training. He eventually returned in round 18. Yeah, round 18, scored the 44, so not one that really would have been one you want to counted. Then he missed round 19 due to soreness before playing 6 games before the finals. And then he had a hamstring injury to finish the season. So he had a very injury-riddled season. So you can probably put this one behind him to say this one's one you just want to write off. Really didn't get his body right. No preseason. Just constantly battling with his body. So hopefully with a big preseason that he should be much better than what he showed this year. But what I really wanted to focus on is the roles that he played in this season. So he had played a mixture of roles. He played a bit of mid, bit of wing, bit of the halfback, which I can show you here. So you can see where they sort of analyze where he was. It was mid, half forward, flank, mid, wing, halfback as well. So they had a mixture of roles, and he really scored depending on where he was. The important role that we wanted to focus on was probably the last one, where he played this halfback flank sort of role, where he was being a distributor of halfback. So that's where he scored the most, and that's where we would ideally want him to play. So he averaged in those 3 games. It was only 3 games, so it's only very small sample, but he averaged 91 off halfback. So that's obviously 17 points of upside right there, and I think that's very similar to what he could do. We've seen him, like, I don't have to look back far to see what he's capable of. He averaged back-to-back 110s back in 21-22 before, falling off a little bit in 2023, where his role was shifted quite significantly, dropping in CBAs and whatnot. So just with a few of these younger blokes coming in. So he can absolutely accumulate the ball, and he'd be ideal for this sort of role to be on halfback. He took a few kick-ins, not many, obviously 3 for the season, but that could be more on the horizon for him if that's the way they want to go. Yeah, and most of his possessions were deep in defense 50, so really showed that that's where they want him to play, and I think that's where he's going to play a lot more to start next season. He's also the captain of the squad. Obviously, there's no statistical data to say that the captain makes much of a difference, but it definitely means that a lot of the younger players rely on that older player just to pass the ball a little bit more, so it does bump him up a fair few points. So I always like to keep that in mind. We see it with Dawson all the time, where they just pass it to him. Obviously, he's an elite player, same as Callum Mills. I think he can absolutely be one like that for us. I just think he's undervalued. No matter where he plays, even if he plays as a part-time midfielder role, which I probably should talk about. Obviously, Luke Parker now leaving the squad, that does free up 30 to 40% CBAs. Does Callum Mills start to slot into that sort of position a little bit more? He did play as like a 30% midfielder, part way through last season. So that's potential. And I still think, like I said, I still think he's value no matter where he plays. I still think he's going to average, 88 to 93 in whatever position he plays. So he's one I'm very bullish on. It's just, again, early season buy, just making sure that we're not having too many of those players. Like I said, you don't want to start probably 3 of those guys. So there's potential that if Coleman doesn't get up and play round 0 and play round 1, then there's a chance I probably start both Roberts and Mills, or Mills and Perryman if that's the way I want to go. So yeah, there's definitely ways you can go around it, but I'm definitely bullish on both of those halfback guys for us. There's only a couple more names I want to quickly mention. Like I said, I don't think there's too much depth that's going on here at the Sydney Swans. They're pretty much at that peak, and they're not looking to change the team too much. It's just a wait and see in terms of their magnets that they change around. But this next guy I want to talk about is a bit more of a skeptical pick. He is priced down at 44, so at 450k, and that is Angus Sheldrick, who had a massive 2023, had a breakout season where he only played 7 games, right? But he was amazing for us during the buys, particularly. I'll show you his numbers pretty shortly. But he played 0 games in 2024, so he's got a full 30% discount off of his 62 average in 2023, which now prices him down at 44. He has been on the brink of playing their another midfield role for them. He came in and out of the side in 2023. I'll show you his numbers here now. If I go back, or can I do it here? Going back to 2023, he had very low time on ground, which is a little bit of a concern, but his points per minute is amazing. Like 1.1, 1.14, 1.13, 1.16. He's just a points per minute beast. He just does not care that much. So if he can get full-time game time and absolutely just rip into it, I can easily see him being an 80 average player quite simply. So he is definitely one high on my radar if he gets a gig, especially like I said with Callum Mills. With Luke Parker being out of the side. I think he could be one that slots into that sort of role, plays that sort of 30% CBA, and just really be that distributor for them. So I really like what he can do. And what I didn't say was that he did have 2 sub-affected games in that 2023 season. So if we were to remove those 2 games, he would have averaged 82. So obviously a small games portion with 5 games to it, but it's enough to say that he knows how to score. Like I said, the points per minute is absolutely amazing. And I just feel like there's a position for him to really slot in 2025. So big one for me to watch. He did have a few injury concerns last year. You can see why he missed a big portion between round 10 and round 16 in the VFL. But just look at his VFL numbers. Like, you don't have to convince yourself too much that this guy knows how to score points. Like, he easily averaged over 100, probably closer to 110 in that average, only with 4 scores below 100 out of his 12 games or something, whatever that is. So he knows how to rack up the peel. So one to keep an eye on if he has if he slots into their side. So, but he'd have to play probably round 0 for me to be confident to select him in round 1. And at this point in time, I'm not sure if that's one that I'm confident in just yet. And finally, we will talk about Jesse Datoli. Looking at his junior numbers, I just want to quickly say that he is a small forward mid, so he's more of a forward than he is a midfielder, but he does have the talent to be a midfielder if he was to go in there. He is classed as a mid forward, which is handy. Could be on the bench for us, or even slot onto the on field for us if he was selected, which is very unlikely in my opinion. I don't see the fact that them likely to go to these sort of guys that are very young. They're very experienced list. They're one of the oldest lists in the league, and obviously pushing for a premiership. I don't know if they're just going to slot in a very young kid, even though he is a high draft pick. I think they have other guys in the wings that probably deserve the chance a little bit more, and have more proven talent. So he's one to just keep on the watch list because he can score. He scored a 72 in the under 18s and an 84 average in the talent league. So he knows how to rack up the pill and he knows how to score fantasy wise. But I think it's just very unlikely that he's going to be in the side. So keep him on your watch list, but very unlikely that he'll be in your side. To finish off, I'll just have a couple honourable mentions, I guess. So Brodie Grundy is someone I looked into. I really didn't see much value in him, and like he played pretty much full season as a solo ruck. The only way he'd probably bump up his numbers a little bit more is if that his split was a little bit more. So currently it was like a 70-75% split ruck time and on the bench or resting. He'd probably have to bump that up to at least 80-20 to really get that additional bump to get a little bit closer to the likes of, Max and those top line guys. So I don't think he's got that caliber in him just yet. I don't think the Sydney Swans game style also suits him in the way that he likes to play. And he also just spent a lot of time on the bench. Like, I owned him for that first 5 weeks period from last season, and he'd very often go on the bench like twice in one quarter, which was very frustrating. He wouldn't be the starting ruck. He'd come on 2 or 3 minutes in, and then he'd be on the bench to end the quarter as well. So he was just really not spending a huge amount of time on ground. So he's got no interest in me. For me, I just think there's other options out there. Chad Warner, I just think he's more of a super coach player. He's more of that impact player, and I could see him spend more time forward with them throwing the magnets around. He is a very capable forward for them. Hits the scoreboard regularly, so he's one that I could see spend a little bit more time up forward. So a bit of a concern. I wouldn't be starting him. Heaney absolutely had a massive breakout season last year. I just think he's at the peak of his powers. He really, when I look back through his numbers, I didn't really see anything that said his potential value, or there's anything that he's gonna kick it up again. Does he spend more time forward? Like I said, throwing the magnets around, he has been a forward for the majority of his career. Do they just throw him back in there to be that player again? Blakey had a breakout season last year as well. Took a lot more kick-ins and bumped up his average by a good 5 or 10 points. So I would think he's at the peak of his powers. I don't think he's much one that we were looking at. Jake Lloyd, I think the game's past him a little bit. He's moved out on the wing a lot more rather than being this distributing halfback that we have known and love of him, and where he was, a number one defensive fantasy player for us. I just don't think that's him anymore, so he's not one I'm interested in. And then Adams was a big name for us last year, obviously moving to Sydney Swans from the Pies last season. We all thought he would take up this huge midfield time role. But that didn't eventuate. He barely played any time in the CBAs at all, realistically, if I look at his numbers. Averaged 29%, so close to 30%. Sometimes it peaked up to 50%, but he's one that I potentially have a little bit of an eye on, just in case, they throw the magnets around. Do they just throw him in the middle, be that ball that we know that he can be, which we have seen in the past. So, we're just going to watch where the magnets swing with this new coach and see how things go. But those are the few honorable mentions. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed all that and got some new information out of it. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Please leave a like and subscribe if you can. If you have any questions, again, go down the link description. Go to my QU link and ask me any questions there. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
All the pain.